breaking news today.
Please subscribe and then check notification box to get all breaking news alerts.
Off Air Force One and holds up a huge sign. One constant in the moaning and whining we hear from both critics and supporters of President Donald Trump is that he should stop twitting. But luckily for us, and unluckily for the mainstream fake news media, the majority of his supporters don't agree. Although his critics believe Trump is often mean when he tweets, and that his tweets are a distraction from both his alleged fake news scandals and his many accomplishments, Trump's tweeting habits serve as part of the basis for a now failed bid at impeachment by House Democrats and the constant smear jobs from the far-left mainstream media who are intent on pushing the narrative that our president, the one the majority of us support, should be removed from office. As you can see above, there is proof not everyone agrees President Trump should stop tweeting. And to highlight the support President Trump did what President Trump does, he rubbed his detractors' noses in that fact. The New York Times reports. If Trump tweets it, is it news? A quandary for the news media. Since Election Day, President-elect Donald J. Trump has proposed a U-turn in American diplomatic relations with Cuba, boasted about negotiations with a major manufacturer, trumpeted false claims about millions of illegal votes and hinted that he might upend current free speech laws by banning flag burning. All in 140 characters or less. As news organizations grapple with covering a commander-in-chief unlike any other, Mr. Trump's Twitter account, a bully pulpit, propaganda weapon and attention magnet all rolled into one, has quickly emerged as a fresh journalistic challenge and a source of lively debate. How to cover a president's pronouncements when they are both provocative and maddeningly vague. Does an early morning tweet amount to a planned shift in American policy? Should news outlets, as some readers argue, ignore clearly untrue tweets, rather than amplify falsehoods further? In interviews on Tuesday, political editors and reporters said that, for now, they plan to apply the same news judgment they would apply to any statement by a powerful leader, even as some acknowledge that social media allows Mr. Trump to reduce complicated subjects to snappy, and sometimes misleading, slogans and sound bites. Reporting complex policy issues out of tweets, I would say that's not ideal, said Carrie Duff Brown, the newly installed editor of Politico, adding, we have to treat it as one piece of a bigger reporting puzzle that we have to put together. But fundamentally, she said, the thoughts of a president-elect are inherently newsworthy, as long as journalists also provide readers with the right context, like whether a proposal is feasible or illegal, or correct a baseless claim. This is the way he's communicating with millions upon millions of people, and as journalists we can't ignore that, Ms. Brown said. Some readers disagree. On social media, there have been calls for news outlets to boycott covering Mr. Trump's tweets entirely. Critics say that any coverage elevates unsubstantiated assertions and murky policy suggestions. Media would be wise to stop hyper coverage of Trump's tweets, they distract, distort and debase, Katrina Vanden Heuvel, editor and publisher of The Nation, said in a Twitter post on Tuesday. The historian Fred Kaplan declared, it's time to ignore his tweets, echoing others who wondered whether Mr. Trump's provocative statements were a deliberate effort to distract journalists. Part of the concern is that Mr. Trump's Twitter posts can have a ripple effect in the media ecosystem. Producers of morning shows and newspaper assignment editors wake up to head-turning statements from the future leader of the free world. Those remarks sometimes dominate coverage for hours. Even if journalists insert caveats or clearly label a statement as false, the remarks still reach a large audience. But many veteran journalists argue that keeping the public in the dark about their president's comments would be a worse sin. Anything that a president would say, even if it was libelous or scandalous, it's the president talking, and I think you report it, said Chris Wallace, the Fox News Sunday host who moderated this year's third presidential debate. Under any definition, it's news, whether it's sensible or not, factual or not, productive or not. Mr. Wallace recalled that as a reporter in Washington, he reported one-liners from President Ronald Reagan as he boarded a helicopter to Camp David. As far as I'm concerned, this is like Donald Trump making a statement on the way to the helicopter, Mr. Wallace said of the president-elect's tweets. Handling Mr. Trump's Twitter account has been a hot topic in big newsrooms. Matthew Purdy, a deputy managing editor at the New York Times, said on Tuesday that the Mr. Trump's remarks had to be assessed one by one. Clearly his tweets are a window into policy decisions or his state of mind, Mr. Purdy said in an interview. Just because he tweets it doesn't make it news. But just because he tweets it doesn't make it frivolous either. Stephen Ginsburg, senior politics editor at the Washington Post, agreed. My view, frankly, is that everybody is getting way too caught up with the fact that he's tweeting, he said, adding that even if Mr. Trump shouts something on a street corner, I think it's worth taking up on its own merits. In this post-election period, anything he says in any way you have to consider it and you have to weigh whether it deserves a story, Mr. Ginsburg said. At some publications, the calculus about coverage is more about the resources on hand. At the Los Angeles Times, covering every Twitter post would prevent reporters from focusing on other political issues, like the future of the Affordable Care Act. We've got a smaller staff than some other folks do, so I'm sure there have been ones that we've passed on, said David Lauder, the paper's Washington bureau chief. Still, Mr. Trump's tweets have become particularly intriguing. Typically, presidents-elect hold news conferences after the election, but Mr. Trump has not, offering few opportunities for journalists to question him about plans for his administration. He has granted interviews to 60 Minutes, The Wall Street Journal and The New York Times. These pronouncements on Twitter are the only available evidence of what the man is thinking, or wants us to think he's thinking, said Todd Gitlin, a former political activist who has criticized press coverage of Mr. Trump. There is also a novelty factor. American presidents, aware that their words carry gravity and consequence worldwide, are typically circumspect in their remarks, opting for dry statements and withholding major proposals until a legislative or legal framework is in place. Mr. Trump seems to relish doing the opposite, as he did throughout the election season. Jack Schaffer, who writes about the media for Politico, said that journalists could ultimately best serve the public by being judicious in the way they report on Mr. Trump's tweets. I think that you starve the troll by just pointing out that the troll is lying and the troll is trolling, Mr. Schaffer said. Don't ignore him, but hold him accountable when he tweets for effect. Some have speculated that come January, Mr. Trump may rely less on Twitter, once he moves into the White House and has the Oval Office and West Wing briefing room at his disposal. But asked about this on Tuesday, Hope Hicks, a spokeswoman